how about we start with Julian Fleming, because he said, well, maybe he's not so unrealistic in this case, because it came down to Ohio State and Penn State as his top two. Penn State ultimately missed out. Penn State seems to have a common theme there where they don't typically get the top wide receiver in state, unfortunately. That should change. And maybe should, let me ask you, should all those wrong decisions back in the day when Fleming committed to Ohio State, can those be fixed this time around if he potentially commits to the Nittany Lions?
Potentially. Well, I guess first and foremost, I don't think like just like any other Penn State fan, didn't love like the whole Penn State used Justin Shorter incorrectly his freshman year, so that's why I'm not going there. Like his excuse, just because it was kind of like, well, Justin Shorter, what I think proved to be, fine. He ended up, with a fine career at Florida. I think he did get drafted. I don't know if he's on an NFL roster or not, though. But I also don't think like Julian Fleming was wrong in any of it, right? We look back the last couple of years, and I mean, Penn State's been, Jahan Dotson had a good career. I mean, a great career. I shouldn't just say good career, great career. Parker Washington was pretty good, but it was a lot more of, even Mitchell Tinsley was, he did fine as well, but it was less of, the Penn State offense being the exciting offense that when Julian Fleming was a recruit, 2017, that area, probably not what he thought he was going to sign up for. So no, I don't really, hold all that much against him. And I mean, to be honest, this is where I come back to with Fleming. He's not that good. Like, and I say this as somebody that I would be perfectly fine with him coming to Penn State. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but as far as like unrealistic, realistic, things like that, he has simply just been a guy at Ohio State, which is fine, right? He's been a solid wide receiver 3 for them, but this is not the case of someone who, hasn't had opportunity. He's been a full-fledged starter because Jackson Smith-Njigba missed basically all of last season for the last 2 years. 2022 with CJ Stroud, who turns out is a really, really good quarterback. 34 receptions, 533 yards, 6 touchdowns. This year as the, number 3 wide receiver again, and for some games number 2, 26 receptions, 270 yards for only 10.4 yards per catch and no touchdowns. I understand that starting at Ohio State is impressive, so I'm not saying that he's not good, but this isn't the case of somebody that I would necessarily think is going to get a massive NIL bag at USC or Texas or places like that. So that's why I think it is realistic that he could potentially come to Penn State, just simply because, Penn State does have a need for competent wide receivers, which Julian Fleming is. He's certainly a competent wide receiver. I do think he would help the Penn State wide receiver room, but he doesn't profile necessarily as somebody that's going to come in and have, 60 receptions for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns and all of a sudden become a first team all conference player. I don't really foresee that. Maybe there are other colleges that believe that, but I don't know. I tried to take my Penn State blue and white glasses off when I was looking at his highlights, because of course every Penn State fan wants that dream story of Fleming comes home and he becomes an All-American and blah, 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 blah. I just don't think that's who he really is. He's apparently very well respected within the locker room, a great leader. Everybody at Ohio State has said that. Really hard worker, dedicated run blocker, which I think that Penn's wide receiving room needs as well. So I wouldn't want him as the only wide receiver, or wouldn't even want him necessarily as the second wide receiver. But if he comes in a 3 wide receiver transfer class, I would welcome him with open arms. So to answer your question on if he's realistic or unrealistic, I think that he's more realistic than I would have thought, just because I don't think that there's going to be, those scary programs of Texas, USC, Oregon, right? The NIL champions that are going to, put aside something crazy for him. So what do you think? Have you, watched any Fleming tape recently? Because I was in the YouTube rabbit hole, and I don't know. It's just it's tough for me to see somebody who had opportunity at Ohio State and
Yeah.
never took that next step to come here and do that. That's, I guess, where my concern is.
So let's frame it this way. Julian Fleming was typically what, third, fourth, or fifth normally on the Ohio State totem pole between all the wide receivers that were there, right? Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. Like those guys were naturally going to leap over him if they were ever at any point. And that's the case now going into next year. Brandon Inniss, Carnell Tate, they probably had the conversation with him and saying, like, look, you're developing as 5 stars. You're not. And they're probably going to get the lead for targets next year. You got to make a realistic decision. Do you want to compete with them, or do you want to go try to start fresh somewhere else? And let's put it that way. Same thing with Kyle McCord, right? I can't speak on behalf of both of them, but I imagine the same conversation had it. Look, we weren't impressed with the results. We expected better. There's going to be a competition between the quarterback recruit we have coming in and the available options in the transfer portal. You can stay and compete and possibly ride the bench, or you can go and find some place with more security. I anticipate that the same conversation happened both times with McCord and Fleming in this case. So Fleming might have been the 5th or 4th best receiver at Ohio State over his time in Columbus. But I got to say this, Fleming would instantly become the most talented wide receiver at Penn State if he were put on this roster right now over Keandre Lambert-Smith, over Trey Wallace, over Caden Saunders, and any of them, Dante Cephas. Julian Fleming would essentially become the number 1. Is that more of a reflection of how good Julian Fleming could be, or is that how lackluster the Penn State wide receiver room is? Let me say this about Julian Fleming. I think he was overrated as a high school prospect. Fleming was a little bit on the older side. As I know this story because I've covered Central Pennsylvania high school football and everything else. At freshman 7-on-7 at 7-on-7 drills and as a freshman in high school, he was driving himself to the practices, to the scrimmages. Okay. He was 16 years old, but he was a freshman. He was a man among boys in this case. The competition, Southern Columbia is one of the most historic, winningest high school football programs in Pennsylvania for anybody that's watching, listening, that is familiar. In this case, they run the football very well. They don't typically pass all that often, but in double A, there's one single A through 6A. Double A is down below, right? In terms of skill level and competition and everything. It is no wonder that an 18-year-old senior going up against high school players at the double A level is going to have the success that he does. So I feel like Julian Fleming, I feel like the competition finally caught up to him in this case. And that's why he never really panned out as a 5-star at Ohio State. Is he a Division I? Is he a Power 5 wide receiver? Is he competent? Is he capable? As you said, yes. Would he be, if you put him into the Penn State wide receiver room, would he be the best, most talented player right now at this given second on Wednesday, December 6th? Absolutely. But to think that you're going to get a bargain value here of a 5-star that never really panned out, I just don't think he was ever a 5-star to begin with.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just like so lost in the sauce. I don't even know if I would agree with him being the best option at Penn State. Like, I think I'd rather have Cephas and Trey Wallace over Fleming for next year. I mean, again, I really don't know. Maybe I'm completely off base. I do agree with you that I think, again,
he was also, again, it was in a crowded wide receiver room. It's not like Fleming was taking reps as the one. It was always Wilson, Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr. They always moved up into the one spot. It's not like they said, okay, Julian Fleming, you're going to be the X. He was always the 3rd or 4th option in the offense. What would he be like with a Drew Aller as the number 1 option? And then you have Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace as the complementary pieces. With an even target share, I got to say that he would obviously do better than what he did at Ohio State just because of the in-house competition.
I think, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to.
Oh, that's why we have these conversations, right? That's why we have these debates.
No, I'm trying to, pick my words wisely here because I can't say that I've watched every single second of Julian Fleming, so it's not, an extremely strong take. But when I watch, the some of the players that Penn State has offered, as far as Jamori Macklin at North Texas, Group of Five, but even Donovan McCauley, Deion Burks at Purdue, Antoine Wells at South Carolina, guys like that, and compare them to Fleming. I mean, not that Fleming is a little below them, but I don't know. I just, especially this season, I thought separation was a bit of an issue. I think
that's Penn State's problem too. Wide receivers don't separate. So great, we're just adding someone else into the fold that can't do that.
Now he's a big body. He's 6'2". I think he's listed 210, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he's a little bit bigger than that. And he is good at using his body and making contested catches and things like that. And I do agree with you that I think a lot of what Ohio State was doing, especially you look at the Penn State game this year, they were simply it was either Marvin Harrison Jr. or Cade Stover as far as the passing game goes, or at least a lot of it. I just, think that for someone like Julian Fleming that, was a 5-star, number one kid in his class and, goes to a place like Ohio State, of course there's competition, but just that there just would have been a little bit more flashes. I'm forgetting the name, the Detroit Lions wide receiver who was at Ohio State and then transferred to Alabama. I can't think of his name.
Jamison Williams.
Thank you. Right. Yep. Like he was a guy that when he played, like he was actually truly blocked at Ohio State those 2 years, right? He didn't get that much time. When he did play, he was catching 80-yard touchdowns and things like that. And he goes to Bama and boom, all of a sudden he's really, really good. I just, would hope that, and I don't think that Europe necessarily this case, but right, Penn State fans, basically every single offseason since Julian Fleming has enrolled at Ohio State, because it's been since that first year that it hasn't worked out. Every single offseason, it's like, oh, maybe Fleming wants her transfer portal. I would just hope that Penn State fans are aware that it's not 5-star Fleming. And in the best case scenario, it's probably not going to be wide receiver 1 Fleming either, right? He'd be coming here kind of doing similar things to what he was doing at Ohio State. Now, I do think he would see a bigger target share just because Penn State does not have Jackson Smith-Njigba or Marvin Harrison or players like that. But
be nice.
It would be nice if Marvin Harrison Jr. got an NIL deal from Penn State, didn't go to the NFL. I just think he would just be more of, I say just the guy, and I'm not saying that like negatively, but he would just be part of the group here. Maybe that's 40 catches, maybe that's 50 catches. I don't know, but again, I would be happy with him coming here, and that's kind of why I do think that he is more realistic than maybe would meet the eye originally with kind of his background with Penn State and how, at least fan wise, things went a little sour. I think James Franklin is generally a little bit smarter with that, and even going back to Fleming, I don't even think Stubblefield was his main recruiter. I think it was Gerard Parker. So that's so many so long ago. And even Parker, I think, was brought in, prior to that, it was Gaddis. So, and David Corley. So, it's just a different Penn State. James Franklin is one of the few constants of that recruitment back then. But I would be happy with Fleming to sum it all up. I feel like we spent a long time on Fleming, but I would be happy with him as long as he's not, as long as people aren't thinking that he is going to be the savior, which I don't think that Penn State necessarily would think.
Yeah, no, like I said, don't think you're getting a bargain value here on a former 5-star who just needs to break out of his shell. We know what he is. Don't romanticize that he's going to return to being one of the top wide receivers from the high school class. But I got to say that he's comparable to what the talent level at Penn State is right now. I think both those statements can be true. Both of those statements can be true. And I think it takes some pressure because then, Keandre Lambert-Smith doesn't have a great game. Okay, now it opens up other options because it felt like when one was shut down, the entire group was shut down this season. Yeah. So I feel like there's a little more. It's an upgrade. It's a bonus. It's a plus if you can get him, but you still need a second target.